Welcome to our video on the topic of Hungarian notation in C#. Hungarian notation is a naming convention that involves prefixing variable names with type identifiers, such as I for integers or N for floats. While Hungarian notation was once popular, it is generally best to avoid it in C# for several reasons. First, it can make code less readable, as the prefixes are not always descriptive and can make it harder to understand the purpose of the variable. Second, the prefixes can be misleading, as they don't always accurately reflect the type of the variable. Finally, Hungarian notation can be outdated, as modern IDEs and new languages with features, such as generics and type inference, have made it less relevant. In this video, we'll take a closer look at why it's generally best to avoid Hungarian notation and how to use more descriptive and accurate naming conventions in your code. Hungarian notation is a naming convention in which the names of variables and other elements in a program are prefixed with a type identifier. For example, a variable representing an integer might be named iCount or nLength, with the I or N prefix indicating that it is an integer. There are several reasons why it is generally best to avoid Hungarian notation in C# or any programming language. It can make code less readable. Prefixes like I and N are not very descriptive and can make the code more difficult to read and understand. It can be misleading. The prefixes used in Hungarian notation do not always accurately reflect the type of the variable. For example, a variable named iCount might be expected to be an integer, but it could also be a floating point value or even a string. It can be outdated. Hungarian notation was popular in the early days of programming, when data types were more limited and less flexible. However, with the introduction of newer languages and features, such as generics and type inference, Hungarian notation has become less relevant and can even be a hindrance to good code design. A good example of code that does not use Hungarian notation is shown on the slide. Just use customer count, table length, or first name without the prefixes. And always try to use descriptive names as shown in the last module. Now let's summarize the key takeaways from the last module. Here's what you should remember and apply in practice to write better code. Hungarian notation is a naming convention that involves adding type identifiers to the names of variables and other elements in a program. It is generally best to avoid Hungarian notation, as it can make code less readable, misleading, and outdated. Instead of using Hungarian notation, use descriptive and accurate names for your variables and elements. Just use the features of modern IDEs and programming languages.